Today, we're very fortunate to have three very experienced engagement, comms, and community and customer speakers with us today. First, we've got Evelyn Rodriguez. She's a manager, customer and community at Water Services Australia, WASA. Got Catherine Ferrari. She's an engagement and communication specialist, and she was also the former GM customer community at the Water Corporation in Western Australia. And we've also got Jane Shepherd, who's the acting GM of corporate and community relations at TasWater. Thank you, Evelyn, Catherine, and Jane for being here with us today. So we'll kick it off with Evelyn, and Evelyn's going to be talking about involving the customer and community in water businesses. Evelyn, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. So my name's Eve, and I'm joining you from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and you can see behind me, that's in the eastern beaches of Sydney. So I pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So just a bit of a background, I work for the Water Services Association, and we're the peak body for the water utilities around Australia. Just a little bit of background, I'm sure you might be familiar with some of this, but in general, water utilities in Australia are, not in general, but water utilities in Australia are all government owned. Most are run as government owned corporations. So there are some council owned and run water utilities, and they tend to be in the regional areas of Queensland and of New South Wales. All water utilities are monopolies, though there is some competition that exists in parts of New South Wales. We also have economic regulation across the country, but it differs from state to state. So generally the economic regulator is independent and sets the prices, but in some states this is more of a price monitoring role. So they put their recommendations up to government, they check the prices look okay, but the government has the final say in what those prices look like. And since corporatisation, so as I said, most water utilities are now government-owned corporate entities. Since that, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years, water utilities have actually become more focused and engaged with their customers and communities. And one way we see that is WASA actually runs a benchmarking survey where we survey about 10,000 customers across Australia. And we also survey the customers in Auckland and Wellington as well. And we ask them to tell us what they think of their water provider. And we survey both council run and also corporatised entities. And what we see in general is that the corporatised entities perform a lot better than the council run entities. And it just shows that even though they're that little bit more removed from their community as corporate entities, they still are able to deliver a good customer experience, and the customers and community are happy with how they run their organisation. So, all right, so just to get into it, types of engagement. Please. Sorry, I've got kids at home, there's a school strike today. Types of engagement, okay. Engagement, so we've got a couple of different types of engagement that we're going to talk about today. But the first, we're going to focus on the two types of strategic engagement that happen in water utilities. So the first is water utilities engage with their customers and communities when setting service levels and prices. So, can you please go out? No, please go out.
The joys of COVID, Eve.
I'm so sorry, everyone. School strike on today and I can't get rid of the kids.
No, don't worry about it. I think we've all been there.
So there's two types of engagement to deliver those prices, and most water utilities go through this price setting process every 4 to 5 years, and they've got to engage with their communities and their customers when deciding the service levels and also the, what investments and therefore prices. The other one is engagement for long-term water planning, and particularly during the Millennium Drought, water utilities had to look at different sources for water, and they really needed to include the community in that discussion. And I won't go into that too much, but Catherine is going to talk about that in some detail. And there's also engagement that happens around a particular project, which you're probably familiar with. I won't delve on this because this is more community consultation around an infrastructure project. But I should also point out that all water utilities do ongoing customer research and brand tracking, where they're surveying their customers, they're involving them in customer journey mapping, and they use that to help improve how they interact with their customers, make sure they're getting rid of those pain points, and generally making interactions and how customers do things with them a lot better. So this happens throughout. It's an ongoing thing. It's not a specific engagement, but it happens. And we're not going to talk about that today, but it does play a role in how the engagement plays out. All right, so you may also ask why water utilities are carrying out customer engagement, considering that we're monopolies, state government owned. One of the reasons we found is that it's really changed from being an asset run business where the engineers make all the decisions. Community expectations are being pushed a lot higher by other competitive sectors. So if they have a great experience when they ring their bank or their telco provider, they're going to expect that same level of service and ease of doing business from their water utility as well. It's also become an important part of all regulatory models. So in general, that the regulators, economic regulators, will expect to see that there's been consultation and engagement with their customers when coming with a price submission. The other thing we discover is that when things go bad, you want that certain amount of goodwill bucket filled. So water utilities put a lot of effort into developing trust and brand with their community. So if there is a major issue, service interruption, things like that, you've got that goodwill already built up. The other thing is communities like to see their priorities and views reflected in the business and the operations of the water utility. And if they can see that, they're less likely to complain to government. And if government are getting a lot of hassle from their customers and their electorate about the water company, then they tend to get themselves involved in the business of the water utility. And no water utility likes that, so they like to keep their customers happy. So there's less interference from government as well. And one thing that we're seeing more and more is water utilities are getting quite involved in the strategic planning for their community, their cities and their regions. And the more involved or the more trusted they are by the community, the more likely governments are to include them in that planning. And this is not only good for the community, it's good for the water utility as well, because they can have some say. Decisions about what affects the water business are also, they can be part of that as well. All right, so engagement for a price review. So this is what happens in Australia and the UK. And our models in Australia are kind of similar to the model in the UK. So the regulator requires the water utility to carry out customer engagement. This is a key part of the pricing submission and probably one of the most involved parts of the pricing submission. So just like the economists are involved in pulling together those prices and doing the analysis, the regulator is not just looking for efficiency, they're also looking for customer engagement, and they want to see that reflected into that pricing submission. And as I said, it's very similar to what happens in the UK, where the water businesses are privately owned, and also in Scotland, where it's a government-owned entity as well. Now, I won't go into too much more detail for this because Jane is going to talk about this in detail for TasWater and the economic regulator down there. But essentially, what used to happen in the past is the water utility just used to put together their pricing submission, send it to the regulator would look at that and say, well, we think that's in the best interest of customers, or no, you need to get your prices down more, we think there's more efficiency, but the customer wasn't involved in that process because the regulator acted in the interest of the customer. Now that's changed now, where they're actually saying, we're just going to check efficiency and things like that, and we're also going to check that you've spoken to your customers, but you need to own that relationship with your customers. So demonstrate to us that you've been speaking to them, demonstrate to us that you've done research and tracking and that you've checked it over and gone back and spoken to your customers, and we'll be looking for that. We want to see that you've developed that relationship, you've had engagement with your customers, and you're reflecting that into your price submission or the prices that you're suggesting. And Jane will talk you through the process that they went through at TasWater for that. So engagement for long-term planning. So this is similar, but it's also a strategic engagement process. And while it's not about setting prices, it's about setting the long-term planning for your water supplies into the future. So as you know, we've gone through a whole series of droughts, climate change and extreme events have had a major impact on water utilities and their investment requirements into the future. And this is only going to get more pronounced with climate change. This has been a major issue since probably the early 2000s when we went through the millennium drought across Australia. There were severe water shortages, and one of the things we realised back then is we can't rely on rainfall dependent sources. We have to look at other sources of water. Now, this is a conversation that you require the community to be part of as well. They need to be part of water efficient practices and demand management, but they also need to be happy about the water sources that you're planning for the community, not only because of the cost. So you no longer, we call it manufactured water. You have to actually produce this water, so there are costs involved. And the water's coming from different sources, some of which people may not be used to. So you have to make sure they're on board and accepting these different sources of water. And this is quite a long conversation. And there's, you have them in different ways in different communities, but Catherine is going to talk about this in a little bit more detail and the process you go through. So I'm just going to talk about a few principles of good engagement that we see. We've done a lot of work with water utilities and case studies and looking at good practices, not just here in Australia, but across the world as well. And these are some of the things that, a bit of a summary of what we see. First thing is you've got to start early and give enough time. So in terms of your engagement for a regulatory submission, the water utilities that are putting in good pricing submissions with strong engagement and input from customers are starting 2 years before to start that engagement process. So, and it's not a single engagement activity. They'll run research, they'll do online forums, they may do town halls, they'll look at, they may start with a blank page asking customers what they want, then they'll go back with some more data, speak to customers again. They may run citizen juries, willingness to pay studies. There's a whole range of different activities that make that up. And it's quite unique depending on basically your community base and also your water utility as well. The other thing is you have to be clear what's up for engagement. There's no point in telling your customers that they have a say in everything when there's certain things such as compliance around water quality or environmental standards that they don't have a choice in, because that's been set by an environmental or a health regulator. So you need to talk to them about what they can have a say in and what they can't. The other thing we know is you have to be flexible. Your customers may come back saying with something that you don't expect. And an example of this happened probably a few years ago in South Australia when they were doing that. Their customers were very, very keen on recycled water. If anyone's ever been to Adelaide, the city is surrounded by beautiful green parklands. So what they wanted to make sure that they remain green even during a period of dry climate. So they were willing to pay extra. So back then they were told that the customers were willing to pay a lot extra for recycled water. That was something they weren't prepared for, so they had to go back and do a whole lot of research around that and the willingness to pay, but they had built that flexibility into their program, and luckily they had that, otherwise they wouldn't have been able to deliver for their customers. The other thing is removing bias. So when you're engaging with customers, the regulator or whoever's looking at your pricing submission or your research wants to make sure that you haven't influenced the view of the people that you're engaging with. So they look at how the pre-information is prepared. So often they use external companies for that. They also get external facilitators, people who are good at ensuring that the information provided to the customers as part of this engagement is free from bias. The other thing that's become a requirement, particularly in Victoria, is what we call inclusive and universal engagement. So that means including different customer cohorts, not just across the age and gender demographic, but also looking at people with particular, like it could be disabilities, it could be parents with young children, Indigenous groups. You have to make sure that you've reached out to these groups or their advocates and make sure they're part of the process and make it easy for them to engage as well. So that's become quite important as well, to see that demonstrated, particularly disadvantaged or potentially vulnerable groups are part of this engagement program as well. They want to see more than one source of truth. So if you're suggesting that you want to invest money in something, they need to see the research from your customer group and also from another source, because sometimes research, particularly customer research, can be interpreted in different ways. And a good example of this is Yarra Valley Water, who carried out a willingness to pay choice modelling exercise. And they also carried out a citizen jury where they asked a question through a deliberative group of customers, and they got the same answer. So that's more likely to be, that investment's more likely to be supported by the regulator. Very important that you demonstrate where you've made a decision based on customer input and how that's impacted it. So that could be changes in your key performance indicators, changes in service levels, how you stage an investment, and you'll need to point that out quite clearly in your submission to the regulator. They'll want to see that. Close the loop throughout the process. That means keep going back to customers and saying, is this what you meant? This is what you've told us, and this is how we've changed it. Does this look right? And that's just not right at the end. It's throughout the process as you carry on this engagement. And the final one is a lot of water utilities. This is a requirement in the UK. It's not a requirement in Australia, but it's good practice to use challenge panels. And these are a group of independent experts who look at how you've interpreted the customer engagement and research and how you've put it into your plan. And then they sort of look for bias, if there's any assumptions made which aren't valid. So they're like your sense check to make sure that you're actually doing things the right way. And that's what we see in the best types of engagement programs and those that regulators tend to accept. And just finally, these are some of the trends we're seeing. Where we see there's reviews of regulatory models, they're actually making the role of the customer even stronger as part of that. They're engaging across that IAP2 spectrum, and I'll just show you what that looks like. So this is engagement of what happens with the customers. Before, it was sitting around the informal consult. So you're basically doing things, showing it to a customer saying, are you happy with this? Now we're seeing water utilities, the most advanced ones are probably sitting in that collaborate sphere, where they ask a question of a group of consumers or customers and say, how do you think we should do this? Here's information, tell us who you want to talk to, and then you come up with a series of recommendations that will work with you to see what we can deliver. Empower, which is putting that final decision in the hands of the public, that's probably more the Scottish Water model, where they have a customer forum that submits that works with the water utility to develop recommendations and then sends that straight to the regulator. Whereas with the collaborate, most water utilities still have to get whatever the board has to make the final decision. So, but we are moving more in that collaborate sphere, which is really important to see. It means customers have a greater role in designing what their water utility does. Incorporate sources of customer data and intel. So all that complaints data, all those surveys that we do around brand, around customer satisfaction after interaction, is more and more that's being incorporated in part of the engagement programs. And quite interesting is customers now want to be able to engage on public value. And what I say by that is water's, it's more than just water and sewage services in Australia. They want to talk about greening parks and recycled water and heat island effect and a whole range of things that green and blue spaces, they want to be part of that conversation. They say water utilities can make a difference. So how water utilities interact with these things that aren't your just typical water and sewage is another area they're getting involved in as well. And we can see that in the UK, it's become particularly strong as well. And most importantly, the topics for engagement are influenced by the customer. So we just don't, as a water utility, you don't go and say, we just want to talk about investment around service levels. The customer may say, well, we want to talk about recycled water and a whole range of other things. Is that on the cards as well? And so those types of topics are being set by the customer as well, and that's what the water utility will engage in. So we won't engage, the water utility won't set the agenda. We won't talk about everything, but customers are having more of a role in saying what they would like to talk about. So that's a bit of a summary of what we're seeing in engagement. I'm going to hand across to Catherine. That's going to give you a very interesting case study on engagement around water security planning.
I thought I'd just start by talking about why we got into this engagement piece. And really it's because water utilities are in the forever business. And what I'm talking about is a 20-year evolutionary journey of engagement with stakeholders and the community. From my experience, access to water is a very emotive issue, and access to clean water is seen as a basic human right and a necessity for life. And water utilities are responsible for providing safe, reliable drinking water in a sustainable way. In fact, as a water utility, we understood that we were in the forever business and planning and developing sources and working with the community to ensure that our water sources indeed lasted forever. So just in terms of a bit of background in relation to Western Australia, where I am, the 2000 millennial drought hit southwest Western Australia harder and faster than anywhere else in Australia. Average inflows into the Perth dams dropped dramatically in the preceding 10 years. And we had been planning using 30-year averages for our long-term planning. And we then realised early in the 2000s that we had to start focusing on 10-year averages, and that told a very different story. So we pivoted as an organisation from those 30-year timeframes to planning on 10-year timeframes. So engaging with our community, our customers, our stakeholders became pivotal to our survival. So the first case study I'm going to look at is water efficiency. And so why did we go down the route of water efficiency programs and measures? In the early 2000s, it was critically important because it was something that we could deal with immediately with the community, and the community could readily understand it. And the initial and largest water efficiency measure implemented was restricting the number of days that you could water your lawns and gardens. And that may sound unusual, but in Western Australia, we get very little rain between, say, November and March. So we water our gardens. We have very green, lush lawns and gardens, and we put a lot of water on them. So, and pre-2000, 2002, you could water whenever you like. So our largest water efficiency measure was restricting the number of days that you could water your lawns and garden. Community were initially negative and negative about this, and this was critical in the early years because we estimate that our early water efficiency measures, this particular one change saved in the vicinity of 45 gigalitres per year, or the same amount of water that is produced from the first of the desalination plant.
The water efficiency programs were focused around engaging with the community in the broadest sense, and very few organisations actually tell their customers to use less of their product, but that's effectively what we did for the best part of a decade. And the hallmarks of the campaigns that we ran were to deliver constant, consistent and clear messaging via large-scale advertising campaigns. That was the centrepiece. Today, Water Corporation still does those campaigns. They ramp up as needed. So in years when there's been less rainfall, there's more issues, there's larger campaigns. In other years, there's less focus on that. Another hallmark of the success of those water efficiency programs was actually building relationships with the industry, and largely the gardening related industries like lawn providers, garden centres and the like, and also the gardening media. And we consistently engaged with them and supported them with various programs. And largely they were our advocates in the community rather than detractors. And particularly in tough times, advocates are what you need, and you need those advocates supporting you. And we were mindful that we needed to support industry as it was a significant employer of people and also put a significant amount of money into the community. We did our job in relation to the community advocating for water efficiency advocating the water efficiency messages, because eventually the 2-day-a-week outside watering regime was embedded into legislation with full support of the community and is still in place today, and now also includes a total outside watering ban for the winter months, again advocated and supported by community. And this was done using industry experts to advocate the same messages that the advertising was saying, but giving it a very public face. However, eventually message fatigue starts to set in, and the community started to say, we can't do any more, we are doing as much as we can, and it will impinge on our lifestyle if we make any further changes. So what are you doing, Water Corporation? And the community clearly saw it as a failure of the organisation to adequately plan for the future, which wasn't necessarily the case, but where we had not been successful as we could have been was painting the picture of all of us are in this together. And the messaging and the engagement had moved from a discussion about drought, and in fact by 2005 we weren't using the word drought in any of our communications, and we were using terminology like responding to our drying climate or towards climate resilience. Now, this is very different to what other parts of Australia were doing. So we were a bit of an outlier here, not using drought terminology, because we saw it as a permanent change, not a drought that would go away. And that's pretty much what has happened in Western Australia. So we then started focusing on climate resilience, and that formed the next significant focus of our engagement with stakeholders and community. And it had three arms, which was reducing water use, which was the continuation of the water efficiency discussion, developing new sources, and the centrepiece of that was building 2 desalination plants over about a 10-year period. And the third arm was increased water recycling, with a centrepiece focus of recycling of treated wastewater. And the 3 arms were underpinned by messaging around being environmentally responsible and of building and supporting community partnerships. So the second case study is around groundwater replenishment, which is the third arm of the climate resilience of increasing water recycling. And this engagement was very different. This project was the first potable reuse trial project in Australia where wastewater is treated to drinking water standards and then stored in underground aquifers that naturally purify the water further. And Western Australia, or Perth in particular, sits on massive underground aquifers. So this made sense for us here in Perth. The then CEO of the Water Corporation stated publicly that the technology and engineering was in place at the time to successfully undertake groundwater replenishment, but a 3-year trial would be undertaken to engage community and stakeholders to support groundwater replenishment. And most importantly, if at the end of the 3-year trial, community support was not there, the full plant would not go ahead. So this was clearly a different level of engagement with the community, and also clearly we were stating that a project would not go ahead without community support. And the community engagement model that we used for this project was based on a program that Orange County Water District in California had run for many years, where a similar scheme to supply 50% of local drinking water had included a very successful community engagement program. And we largely modified that program to form our engagement program. This project also worked with the Department of Health and Environmental Regulation to develop a memorandum of understanding for the trial and establish guidelines for drinking recycled water specific to this project. There was no model to use here, as this type of scheme had never been undertaken in Western Australia, or for that matter, anywhere else in Australia. Having the scrutiny of the regulators and ensuring that all the results from the drinking water monitoring remained open and transparent were key to gaining people's trust in the project. And clearly, Water Corporation wasn't leading this project, this part of the project. This was the Department of Health, and we were fitting into their guidelines. And another hallmark of this particular project was the visitor centre that came with the demonstration plant. The plant was visited by over 11,000 community members, media and other stakeholders, and a number of interstate people came to have a look at this plant during the 3-year trial. We did a lot of research and surveying around the people that were those 11,000 people. And we were doing pre and post surveys from the visits. We had technical specialist staff on hand to answer any questions. What became very clear is that there was significant misinformation in the community. Post-tour surveys indicated over 90% support once the participants had a thorough understanding of the multi-stage process involved in groundwater replenishment. At the end of the 3-year trial, the state government approved the full-scale plant, which is now operating, and a second stage of the plant has also been built. This was in contrast to a similar plan in Toowoomba, Queensland, a few years earlier that failed to convince the community, and led by the media, the plans were scuttled. So the hallmarks of this project, the Water Corporation project, is that in the context of the project, the time taken to engage with community and stakeholders was key to the success of the project. And 3 years is not a long time in something that is so important. And it is important, and how important it was for the stakeholder engagement with government to deliver the appropriate regulatory framework for this particular project. So I might just move on to the third and final project that I wanted to talk about. And it's very similar to the work that's done in other states for pricing submissions, but this particular project wasn't done for pricing submission. It was done as a purely an engagement tool with a wide range of our community. So it was called Tap In. It was launched in late 2016. It was a statewide community engagement and customer research program that was initially run over an 18-month period. The program was designed to help identify which issues are of most importance to our customers, which solutions the customers most value, and their willingness to pay for each of the solutions. It was designed specifically to build preferences to Water Corporation's corporate strategy and financial decision-making process. It was clearly about driving a customer-centric water utility. And around 2015, that period of time, customer-centric water utilities was used by a number of Australian water utilities as the centrepiece of their corporate strategies. So customers from across the state were invited to join the conversation through a wide range of tools and methodologies, not dissimilar to what Jane was talking about, focus groups, workshops, surveys, online portals, social media, using all the contemporary tools available. And the results provided clear insights into customer expectations for a modern day water utility. There were 20 key insights that were further distilled into 8 guiding principles for the organisation. And the first one of those was providing WA with enough water to sustainably live, grow and invest. And that is consistent with the stated purpose of the Water Corporation, funnily enough. Deliver safe and reliable water services, work to keep costs down and help customers to do the same. So customers were looking for us to give them advice about how they could implement certain tools to reduce their water consumption. Deliver services in ways that protect the local environment. They wanted to see us embrace innovation in everything that we did. They wanted to see the new and the contemporary at all times, ensuring that everybody was focused on minimising water use. And that meant the community, local government in particular, and the corporation. And they wanted us to educate the community, to grow community water knowledge and provide support for all to play a part in this important and they saw it as being very important. They wanted to continue us to continue to listen. They wanted us to keep customers in the loop, and Eve talked about closing the loop and using the insights to shape the utilities decision making. So as I said, Tap-In was designed to be a key input into the corporate strategy and business planning processes. Existing strategies and initiatives were mapped against the customer expectations that Tap-In identified, and that focused the organisation on where the alignment was and where further work needed to be done. And it was expected that the information would drive specific initiatives and strategies. And some of those initiatives and strategies were fed back to customers in that continuous loop. And Tap-In was set up to be an ongoing process where customers would have a mechanism for a voice into the business and input into strategic decisions. And I believe that Water Corporation is about to start Tap-In 2.0, the next generation of Tap-In. So what I've presented here are 3 very different engagement strategies. Water efficiency is long-term engagement for a specific purpose of changing the community's behaviour. It was done over a long period of time with the same global messages. Groundwater replenishment was consultation and engagement on a specific process or project. This one had a whole of community impact, but could easily have been a very specifically targeted project to a location or a region. And then Tap-In is listening to the voice of customer using contemporary modern engagement process, and the community has a real say in the direction of the business. So just finally, what's clear from my experience with a number of these programs is that you need time. You cannot rush good engagement. And if the community thinks that you're rushing or giving lip service to engagement, they will not engage or support your process. And the best example of that is probably the failed water recycling in Toowoomba. That very much was about not giving it enough time. You need organisational commitment to good quality engagement. You need it on an ongoing basis. You need resources. You need to put resources into this, both physical and monetary. And you need to do more than just lip service to the outcomes. You need to be seen to be doing something with the results, commit to change and do it, commit to re-engaging and retesting community assumptions. And I think that is what we see today as modern engagement.
I'm going to share with you today some key insights and learnings from our price and services plan engagement. And just before I do that, I'd like to reflect back on some of the key points that Evelyn shared with us today. So I can actually say that Taswater has been on a very long journey. We were formed in 2009. I commenced with the organisation in 2010, so been witness to most of that journey. And we have come a long way in a lot of the areas that were covered by Evelyn today in terms of our customer engagement journey. But I can say I can certainly remember the days where I used to sit in project meetings, etc., and fight for them to even consider what a customer was, let alone consider any engagement or how this project, etc., would impact on our customers. Fast forward to today, and we have a very clear customer engagement process in place, whereby I think our journey has brought us to the point where the customer is interwoven into pretty much everything that we do. Are we there yet? No, we still have some way to go, but we are certainly well on the way to be becoming a very strong customer-focused, having a very strong customer-focused culture. So leading into the discussion around the regulator engagement around our price and services plan, as most of us would know, a price and service plan is a blueprint, if you like, to maintain the delivery of clean and safe drinking water. It's also a way to improve environmental outcomes and secure enhanced customer service results while keeping bills as affordable as possible. Price and services plans are an ongoing process. I know Evelyn said that, you engage in customers from 2 years out, which is certainly the case, but the price and services process never ends. We're just on the pointy end of our 4th price and services plan here in Tasmania. And we have taken some of the learnings from our previous price and service plan and some of the customer feedback that we've received from PSP3 that we weren't quite ready to probably address at that point in time, or we had to put other steps in place first, and we're now at a point where we can actually revisit those with our customers and continue that journey. This particular price and services plan is for 4 years. It's the first price and service plan we've had for 4 years. Previous ones have been 3 years. So it's really important to get this right because it's in place for an extended period of time. We've reached out over the last 2 years with our customers. So we started this journey in October 2019 with regards to customer engagement. And I think we finished the formal side of it, I think it was around April this year. So it's been quite a journey, interrupted, of course, by our good friend COVID, but it certainly has been very worthwhile. So we've reached out over the past 2 years to customers, community regulators and key stakeholders to better understand their opinions on a broad range of areas, including our current services, policies and performance measures. And the feedback that we've received has informed the proposed changes in our price and services plan around service standards, our customer contract, sewage pricing, trade waste, and developer charges as well. So just going back to Evelyn's discussion around the IAP2 process, that is something that we definitely have engaged in our overall customer engagement framework. It's something that we've applied to this particular price and services plan. I think the thing for us is that we also reviewed a report that WASA produced in March 2019, which was entitled Customer Engagement in the Urban Water Sector. And that very clearly said that there was a shift among water utilities towards greater customer centricity and as Eve said, moving more towards the right of that EAP2 model. And that's something that we definitely took on board. And in response, where we've previously informed and consulted, so using that framework with our customers in preparation for earlier PSP2s, we've actually this time around actively sought opportunities to involve and collaborate with our customers. So we've moved to the involve and collaborate framework in the PSP4 submission. So this included things like willingness to pay surveys. So I'll talk a little bit to that in a moment. And I think one of the most important things with that framework is that as organisations mature, they become a lot more comfortable in moving to the right. And I think that's definitely the case with TasWater. We've matured over time and we're definitely more comfortable now playing in that space of involvement and collaboration with our customers, whereas before we weren't. So that's a key message, I think, from today. So I'm just going to take a few moments just to talk to you a little bit about some of the engagement that we did complete with our customers. And I think Eve spoke to some of these. So we did engage our customers through online focus groups with residential customers, telephone surveys. We had quite a few focus groups, actually. We did individual surveys, particularly with some peak bodies and also with some of our stakeholders. We did online engagement. We have an area on our website which is called Your Say, and we used that portal to drop in fact sheets. And also there was discussion forums that were were dedicated to the PSP4. Specifically, some of the things we engaged our customers through that channel was affordability, fairness and value for money, sewerage charges, residential and business, and also developer charges. So that's some of the ways that we actually engaged our customers. And we also like to inform the way that we engaged our customers and what we engaged our customers on. We also did consult with our regulators across different areas as well. So how we actually promoted and encouraged our customers to participate and have their say was through various channels. We had, of course, you have to, try to reach as many customers as possible and make it as accessible and inclusive as possible. So we did actually have paid articles in our newspapers. So we have 3 major newspapers here in Tasmania. We use social media a lot. So we reached quite a few customers through social media, particularly promoting the Your Say. So trying to encourage people to go to our website and have their say. We were involved in the Customer Consultative Committee that Otter ran, that's our regulator. Here in Tasmania, we produced brochures for our customers, and obviously we had the telephone surveys. And prior to COVID, we did have like in-person customer consultation sessions, but then that moved more to online post-COVID. So we took the learnings from PSP3, which gave us a solid foundation for understanding our customer preferences, and then we built on that through PSP4. And we actually had, I grabbed the number, I think it was about 6,000 engagement interactions across all of those different channels with our customers across the 2 years. And just finally, I guess, how did we actually use the feedback and reflect that in our PSP4 submission? And again, absolutely emphasise what Eve was saying around regulators now having more of an expectation to demonstrate how you've engaged your customers, but also what we're seeing a lot more now with our regulator is demonstrating why. So how does that link back to what your customers told us? You're saying you want to spend money here. You're saying you want to change this measure. You want to introduce this service standard. How does that link back very clearly to what your customers are telling you? So we've actually been through quite a few sessions with the regulator, and that has been absolutely key, that we have to demonstrate that now. So that's actually really good for us to know and learn from, because from now on, when we're making decisions, it's not we have to make sure that we're saying, well, how does this decision, how does this action link back to what our customers are telling us? So some of the ways that we've reflected our customer feedback in our PSP4 submission is through customer service standards. So some recommended changes in that space. Price and service trade-offs. So talking to our regulator about what our customers are willing to trade off on existing and proposed tariffs, where we invest and spend our money, and also in some policies. So some recommended policy changes, which is based on feedback from our customers. And just one example where we're actually proposing a change around customer service standards is, I know it might sound a bit antiquated, but we still have service levels in our service standards. So 85% of calls answered within 30 seconds. Our customers have told us for the last 2 PSPs that they're willing to wait longer if it means that they're going to get their inquiry resolved at first point. Of course, once, if they have to wait a certain, if it exceeds too far past what their threshold is, then it would impact their customer satisfaction. But our customers have told us the last 2 PSPs that. So what we're proposing this PSP is to replace service levels, keep it as an operational measure, but replace it with a first point resolution measure for our customers, so that we can actually clearly demonstrate where we are actually resolving our customer inquiries at first point, which is more valued by our customers than how fast we answer the phone, if it means that they're going to get a better quality experience at the end of it. So I think that's all I was going to share with you today. But as I said, the most important things are that it's a very long journey. We're very comfortable now in moving from in that IAP2 model towards being more engaging with our customers. But that is a journey as well. And yeah, open to any questions that people may have about our experiences.
We've got a few questions from the audience, and I'll start with, I suppose, in the order that they've come in. And the first couple of questions are from Anna Kerno, and I'll direct maybe the first one to you, Jane, around how you deal with complaints from the customer. And then please, Eve and Catherine, jump in with any experiences you've got there. But I'll direct it to you, Jane.
So we have a dedicated, and I'm sure most utilities do, we have a dedicated complaints team. It's not what they're called, but that's their case management. So we, again, I keep saying journey, this has been a significant journey for us over time as well, as to how we actually capture those complaints and what we actually do with them. So we do have very regulated, we are regulated in how the timeframes that we must respond to our customers in terms of communication. That's a guide. We try to, the guide is acknowledge within 2 days, respond within 10, or resolve within 10, but, we don't aim for that. We aim for much shorter than that. We keep our customers engaged, which is most importantly, do a thorough independent investigation and go back to our customers and keep them engaged along the ways, and work with our customers, partner with them to come out with a resolution. Now, sometimes you come out with a resolution that is not what the customer is probably looking for, but how you communicate that and explain that to them. They might not like it, but they may accept it. But also there's plenty of examples where we might, as a result of the investigation, change our approach. And one of the most important things that where we're at right now is actually what we do with that information that we get from customers. So why are they unhappy? That data is, as I think we've discussed at our complaints forums that Eve's part of, or facilitates, this is free customer experience data that we pay a lot of money for, normally, but our customers are giving us free customer experience data. So it's what you do with that and how you learn from that is most important. just touching on that, we've got a customer complaints forum that's facilitated by WASA, which I have found we've been working with WASA for the last 2 years, I think, in that forum, just to refine and how we actually view complaints, how we define them, interpretations, and how we record and report them. And that's been really important as well, to learn and share from other utilities and get consistency across our industry as well.
Great, thanks. Eve, Catherine, do you have anything?
Yeah, I might just add to what Jane was saying. So Jane sort of talked about the process, which tends to be pretty similar across water utilities. There's an ombudsman in each state as well. So if you're not happy as a customer with the resolution or the process, you can go and speak to your ombudsman and escalate it to that, and that will come back. They'll review if you don't believe the water utilities dealt with it appropriately. But what I will say is that water utilities, the culture of boards and water utilities has really shifted around complaints. So we no longer see complaints as a bad thing, and neither do our boards. There's a lot more reporting and anecdotal sort of reporting around complaints. And it's sort of shifted as complaints are a bad thing to be avoided to complaints are a gift. So treat complaints as a gift. They are a free source of information. And then based on that, we can do, the more we're able to collect them and analyse them, the more we're able to do root cause analysis and then use that to fix up some of the issues. So that's really been a big shift for us in terms of complaints, with most water utilities now aiming to capture and report more complaints, which means that they're trying to get that information from frontline staff everywhere in the business. So it's been a real shift for us, and we're seeing some really positive outcomes for customers when it comes to complaints.
Great, thanks, Steve.
I think from my perspective, I've never thought of complaints as a gift. I've thought of them as being valuable, but I'm going to hold on to that, Eve. Complaints are a gift.
Thank you, Catherine. If I can add another dimension to that, you touched on it, Eve, around the frontline staff. And, you know, I've worked at both Water Corporation and at Taswater there, and the commitment and dedication and the care, I suppose, the operators show on the ground. You know, worst case scenario, sewage spill into someone's front yard or lounge room, and that's really important. It's not just it's how they engage, guys fixing it, and that's really important. Do we provide training to them to do that better, or is it just, do you think, a natural?
Yeah, and most water utilities, I have to give an example. It's actually an example from Watercare, where their frontline staff who were dealing with these sewage spills and water outages actually were asking as part of their training when they came on board, they're like, why aren't we getting customer training as well? And they had such great feedback. They actually built a little station there, so they talk about how they go to customers, how they deal with things, and so that training is provided to their maintenance staff because they asked for it. It's not because the water utility made them do it. And we're also seeing, when it comes to complaints, it's not that they have such useful insight, but our role in sort of the offices or whatever is to enable them, to make it easier for them to report it. So first of all, you're not going to get in trouble if you report a complaint. We're not going to see as a reflection on you, but also make it easier for them to report. They've got so many things to do. If you can find a solution for them to report it so that you're capturing it, then that's your responsibility as a business.
Great, thank you. I'll move to the next question, also from Anna Kerno. And how are councils involved with customer engagement? Again, I might start with you, Jane, if I may, with this one, in terms of, say, when you're doing your PSP4 consultation and that sort of thing, how do you bring the councils into that?
Yep. So we have a dual relationship with our council. So we have 28 councils in Tasmania, and they are all shareholders in our organisation. So they are a key stakeholder, but then they are also customers of Taswater. So, you know, they have properties that they lease out. They have their, you know, so they are customers. So we, through the PSP process, we reach out to them as a key stakeholder for their input and engagement as a customer. And they, they are free to participate and engage with us through that process as well. And they do. Some of them do, some of them don't, but that's they're certainly engaged thoroughly through that process.
Great. No more comments? No. I'll move to this third question from Anna, and then I'll get to some questions from Angela. Anna Kerno also asks about developer charges, and I think you may have touched on this, Jane, also. And we might have to come back with some more information to you, Anna, on this one. But certainly, can you tell us about developer charges and how it integrates with the council planning? Are we able to comment on that?
Yeah, so I would like to understand the question a little bit more, but developer charges are part of our price and services determinations. So they are part of the submission, and they're set by our regulator and quite separate to the council developer charges, etc. We have a very good relationship with all of our councils. And our developers take them on a journey and explain to them the integration between what they need to apply through the council for and then with our own. I'm not sure I understand the question enough, but I'm happy to come back with the information if that helps, because I don't think I've actually answered the question, but that's okay.
Perhaps, Anna, you can clarify that. But I suppose the takeaway is that the water company's charges are separate to the council charges. Your charges for developers are regulated.
Yes.
Through your submission, and
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So Anna's made a comment here. Understanding that water developer charges are different to council charges. Okay, that helps.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for that. A question here from Angela McLeod, but let me just reorganize it if I can for a second. I'll come back to your question, Angela, and I might just come back to you, Eve, with a question here on how important is research to understanding what the customers are thinking and require. You've touched on it. If you can maybe talk a little bit.
I mean, it's absolutely critical. So this is like one of those areas that Jane mentioned that didn't really exist 10, 20 years ago, but is now a core business of water utilities. So water utilities carry out a whole lot of research around customer experience. So there'll be your standard research around brand. So they'll do brand monitoring surveys. They'll also do research around what drives perceptions of customers. And we at WASA do research like that as well. And the other bits of research, they'll run willingness to pay research, survey customers. So it's absolutely crucial. So that research forms a foundation to drive water utilities in where they want to fix up, where they should spend their money, which of their current processes customers are the most dissatisfied with. So for example, they may find that customers are quite unhappy with the process around change of address. So they'll do research, which we would call customer journey mapping. They'll survey customers, understand where the problem is, and then they'll fix those issues around their process. So that's just an example of how one bit of research is used. Example with brand research is they'll survey customers to see whether they trust the water utility, and then they may ask them a whole series of other questions with a whole bunch of focus groups to understand what are the things that really matter to you that impacts your perception on trust. And for example, we've done this with water utilities, and we do it at WASA ourselves. And it is interesting to see the two most crucial things that customers care about is they want their water to be clean and safe, and the operations of the water utilities not to endanger the community. The safety of water and operations is really important, and reliability. When I turn on the tap, is that water going to come out? And when I flush the toilet, is the water going to go away? So that's absolutely crucial. But to be honest with you, most water utilities are not having an issue with that at all, because the customer doesn't even think about clean water. And if that happens, the water utility is in big trouble if they can't drink the water, if there's a boil water alert in a capital city in Australia. It's a big deal. So that's not generally an issue, but it is the most important thing. So after that, it's affordability. Are my bills affordable, or am I seeing big spikes or bills like climbing drastically up? And that is the other thing that they're worried about. But as I said, in Australia in general, water bills in the last probably 5 or 6 years have stayed pretty constant. And that's what the regulators are looking at as well. Now, as far as customers are concerned, you only get half the marks if you can keep, so that they're so used to things being, reliable and safe in Australia that they've started to look at other things. And so now what we're seeing that makes the big difference in how customers value and trust you is how you deal with them when they need to talk to you, their perception of how you interact with them in the community. A bit like what Catherine was talking about. It's, did they actually ask me before they told me I was going to now get my water from a desal plant? Or like it's those people want to feel like they're engaged with their water supply. They think like it's different to other services. As the public, we believe water is an ownership and we should have a part in it. And that's why engagement is so important on something like water. So more and more, if you're getting those basics right, customers expect that. What actually brings up your perception and your brand is if you start doing the other things as well, which is why engagement and customer experience has become such a big focus for us.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thanks. If I can just add something to that, at Sydney Water, they embarked on a journey to transform their business to a customer-centric business. And I think most people would have traditionally seen water companies being an asset management business, and that transition in thinking and I suppose philosophy and strategy. I certainly saw good examples of that in Western Australia with Water Corporation when Catherine was there.
Yeah, I think, Mark, the interesting thing there is the hardest group of people to change their view is the utility people, because the utilities see themselves as asset management groups, and changing that to a customer-centric view, it was harder internally than externally.
Definitely, and being an engineer myself, I can see, how they can be challenged to do that. It's important to maintain and operate the assets well. I mean, you get a lot of complaints if you don't, but we're generally pretty good at doing that.
Yeah,
it's the other bit. Jane, do you want to add something or?
I suspect, like I've always, my philosophy is that everything is there for what customer. So our assets are there for our customers, and so it's about that link to everything that we do in the organisation, how that links back to the customer, and that's how I've tried to that's my philosophy. Stay dot here. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. So we've got a question here from Angela McLeod. We had to clarify a little bit or sort of understand it, and the question's now worded, and I'll direct it to perhaps you, Eve, first. As I understand it, there is no engagement with communities in Australia. There was no engagement with communities in Australia before the water entities were put in place because the government thought best. Is this correct? So this is maybe we look at, say, Tasmania and Victoria, etc.
Yeah, so I would say it's less to do with whether they were corporatised or not, probably more to do with the thinking back in the days where it was all about, I kind of see we're almost shifting in how we think of things as a water utility. So it used to be, we're government, it's an asset business, our job is just to get the water and sewage to you and do it properly, and we don't think about anything else. So we know what's right, we're engineers, we're going to do that. And so that's how it used to be before, but there's been a real shift where people have expectations. Just because the water and sewage is working well, they still want to be able to ring or pay a bill easily. And as I said, those expectations are being shifted by your banks and everybody else. Like if you think of all other types of essential services, they were kind of like water was before. They were just essential services and they did core business, but now there's been a real shift. So yes, that's how it used to be in the past, but things have changed now. And whether you're a council owned or run business, they're shifting as well in Australia as well. So you look at the Gold Coast, water entity. It's run by a council, same with Logan Water. And you can see they've definitely shifted to a customer focus as well. And it is about expectations from other areas, but now we're shifted, like we're here, we exist for the customer, to do things for the customer. And then we're also now starting to shift on, you know, we're here for our citizens, the citizens of our community. So we have to do things for our communities as well. So it's not just about making the customer happy at all choice, it's also making sure our community thrives, because water is such a key part of that. And that's been a real shift in how business water entities think, whether they're council run or corporations. That's how we're shifting to now.
Yeah.
Great, thanks, Catherine. Yeah.
I think I totally agree with what Eve's saying there. Community expectations have changed dramatically over the past, let's say, 15 or 20 years in particular. And I think the aspect to community expectations is trust. And I think in the past, people were more trusting generally of councils, government, their health providers, health professionals, a whole range of people. They had a higher level of trust than we have today. Trust has been eroded over the years. Trust isn't a given anymore. You have to build that trust and build that trust contract with your customers.
Great, thanks. I think we've answered your question. And I think you touched on, Eve, on the fact that you probably have a more astute customer, a better informed customer or community, that and they're concerned about environmental issues and not just cost. So, and they expect responsibility from whatever service providers they're buying from.
Yeah.
Yeah, correct. As long as you're getting the core business right, you know, you start stuffing up reliability and water quality, and they go back to thinking about that again. So,
so yeah, you fix something and then you raise the expectation, and it keeps going up. So it makes us better at what we do overall. Another question from Angela, and Angela says, "I like hearing how you are recycling water. Do the bulk of the community accept this?" And perhaps to you first, Catherine. It's a challenging one.
Yeah. So just to use the example of groundwater replenishment, that particular project, we had we tracked community support very closely the whole way through that process, and the more information we gave people, the more they became comfortable with the whole process and what we were doing. There will always be a part of the community that will not support it. And we estimate that was about 10% of the community. We're never going to support it no matter what. You just have to work as best you can to ensure that they're not changing the views of other people. You need to just have the science there, the technical people that can reassure people, and just continually do that. But you will never, my experience is you won't ever get 100% support for anything.
Thanks. Can I just ask a bit more? You spoke about the visitor centres when you had the replenishment project. Did you target schools and younger people in terms of part of that education process?
Yeah, we certainly did. That was part of it, but that visitor centre was wide-ranging. We were bringing stakeholders, local government people through there, government people, interstate people, and we had a big schools program as well. Yeah, because the reason for the focus on the kids is because of what we used to term pester power, where kids are the best influences on their parents and particularly their grandparents. So if we get the kids on board, and this was also in the whole water efficiency thing, we ran a lot of schools campaigns around, you know, turn off the taps, don't clean your teeth with the tap running, and, you know, very basic things like that. And a lot of the feedback we got was around the value of pester power and how kids were pestering their parents to change behaviour. And certainly with groundwater replenishment, the kids were comfortable with it. They had got over the yuck factor of it, and hopefully they were taking that back into their wider communities.
Great, thank you, Catherine. From Angela again, given that customer research is so important and is a priority, do you have any idea of what percentage of budget is put aside for it? Or you could maybe broaden by talking about the percentage of budget put towards community engagement.
I don't know that I can do it as a percentage, but it's a significant amount of money, and I've been a bit out of it for a couple of years, so I don't know what the number is now. But if you say look at a standalone project like Tap In, that went into the millions of dollars for that particular project over an 18-month period. Whole of state, a big engagement project. So what percentage of budget is community engagement? That is hard to say, because it's embedded in across the business. So it'd be hard to pull out exactly what it's costing. But if you look at the infrastructure projects, all had community engagement people working across those projects. So at the time I was at the Water Corporation, the community engagement team was in the vicinity of 20 odd people. The customer research team, which did the tap-in work and things like that, was around 4 to 6 people, and then using external providers. So I can't put a number on it, but it is significant and it is growing.
Eve, is there a WhatsApp benchmark on that you're aware of?
There is, but yeah, we do benchmark things like that. But once again, it's hard because it's split across the business. But I just, rather than saying that, I just like, as Catherine said, it is growing, but more and more there is a benefit of it, because if you engage with customers and they talk to you about stage investments and what's important for them, you actually are only investing in doing the things that matter to customers. So you're not doing all this extra expenditure. And if you're not doing the engagement, then you tie yourself up with months of animosity by communities, which costs you a whole lot more than going in a little bit earlier and carrying out this engagement. And I think it's well accepted by the engineers that run this project that they want their engagement people in there because it makes their job go more smoothly. And it is a more efficient process. I know it doesn't look like that, but time and time again, we see that you bring in the engagement people and you start early and you do that engagement process, you're going to have a smoother process in terms of time, not having to deal with with a whole bunch of community issues because you haven't bothered consulting with them in the first place. So we're seeing that engagement, not only does it deliver better outcomes for the customers, it can save you money because you're not spending money on things that don't really need the money, or you're not spending money on, PR and a whole bunch of things to fix a problem later on.
And I think just adding to that, I think we can all point to examples.
Mm-hmm.
The customer research hasn't been done, the engagement hasn't been done, and it ends up costing you a whole lot more in reputation, in time and energy to go back and right what should have been done in the long run. So it is absolutely worth the investment. And just like I can say here, I kept talking journeys, we've gone from like probably zero investment in this space to relying on strategic initiatives to fund things like this, which is like you just have to put in for the initiative and see whether you get the funding for it or not, to now being, and I can't give you exact figures, but to now being a budgetary item, a standing budgetary item from every year. So it just reinforces the importance and the recognition of the importance of this through the organisation.
And I think to finish that off, that quote by the head of the Essential Services Commission down in Victoria, when they introduced the customer engagement focus for Victorian water utilities, he basically said, look, a water utility can spend $10 million lining 2 kilometres of pipe. I don't see a problem with them spending $1 million to work out the investment for the next 5 years of their water business and talk to customers about it.
Great. We'll try and see if I can get some numbers as a percentage, as an example, for you, and we'll share that with the audience. Just one final question with a couple of minutes left, because I think it's a good one. I suppose, how do you deal with a situation when the community doesn't align with what the water entity is trying to do? And how flexible have you had to be to change your plans? Do you have any examples of that? Sorry, the one I can think of is wanting to build a new sewage plant somewhere and nobody wants it in their backyard on their town.
Yeah. The one I can think of is a water treatment plant, which had already had one round of failed engagement when I started at the corporation, and then we were in the second round of engagement, again failed. It took us 3 rounds of engagement, and the third round of engagement was proper engagement. The first 2 rounds we were giving lip service to it, and until we did proper engagement, proper transparency, we didn't get that project over the line. We still had detractors because it wasn't popular. It was in the hills. We were putting in my terminology, a large scar on the escarpment, and the community weren't happy. But we engaged the community. They were engaged with deciding the colour of the tanks and all sorts of things that we'd never done before, and we eventually got it over the line. And I guess that was the point at which we started really looking at our engagement for infrastructure and really ramping up the amount of community engagement, good community engagement that we were doing.
Okay, great, thanks. Just with a minute or so left, any more comments on that? Do you have any examples, Jane, in terms of maybe where you've had to go back and rethink plans because the community pushed back?
Oh, plenty. I couldn't. It's like I can't emphasise enough. It comes down to the community. And look, you're not always going to have outcomes that the customers are going to love, but it's how you engage with them and explore all the opportunities and how they walk away, the experience, and if they're accepting of that. Because sometimes things, like, let's be honest, some things, there are decisions sometimes that you have to make that simply you have to make from a health perspective, or we've got examples where we've had to introduce, as you would know, Mark, drinking water into some communities, and they did not want it, treated drinking water. And so it's about how you engage with them and take them on the journey. And there's been some really tough ones in that space, to be honest with you. But and there's an ongoing one that I don't know will ever go away that we have down here in Tasmania. But yeah, it's going to happen. The simple message to that is it's going to happen, but it's how you engage and engage early. And yeah, that's, I guess, my message.
Great, thanks.
Everyone's been saying.
Eve, just a concluding comment from you, please.
Yeah, so just I really love that last question, because yes, you do have to be flexible, and in a pricing submission, many water utilities didn't think that they were going to do something, but the customers were quite insistent about it. So you do have to, that's why that start early is so important. And if they say something, you have to properly look at it and be able to. You can't just say, well, we're not going to do that. And the same goes with the sewage treatment plant. And I think it's a really good example up in Logan Water's area of operations, again, a council run, where the community did not want a sewage treatment plant, but it was slated for there. Now, they were smart enough to start a really early engagement program. They were also smart enough to put money aside for the community, and they brought the community in to co-design what that plant would look like, what extra services they wanted. They created a really great sort of like waterway walk down the bottom They created a men's shed and involved them in building parts for the treatment plant and to give them a space where they could meet and do things. So whatever the community wants, involve them in that decision and make sure there's something there for them as well. So it can be a win-win situation, but you've got to set money and resources aside for it. So.
Great. Okay, great. Thanks very much. I might just draw this to a close now. We're running a couple of minutes over. Thank you very much to the panel and then to the audience. It's been an interesting discussion. As I said, the video or the recording and the slides will be put up on our website in the next day or two, and we'll let you know when that happens.